Okay, good afternoon. So I'm happy to be here for this occasion, this little discussion today of one of my favorite books. I'm Francis Xavier Clooney, Frank Clooney. I'm a professor in the Divinity School. I've been at Harvard since 2005 and previously taught at Boston College in the theology department for 21 years. So I'm in my 40th year of university teaching at this point. And my areas of specialization are both in the Christian tradition. I'm Roman Catholic, and I have long, heritage and background in the Catholic tradition. And in fact, I'm a Catholic priest and Jesuit, I should say. But since 1973, so 50 years now, I've been also studying Hinduism. Right after college, I went to Kathmandu, Nepal for 2 years, was introduced to Hinduism and Buddhism. And ever since, including this past summer when I spent nearly 2 months in India, been learning from, meeting Hindu friends, going to different places, giving lectures and so on. So a lot of my work, research and writing has to do with Hindu classical traditions, and then the interface and back and forth between Hindu traditions and Christian traditions. And this shows up in the classroom in courses I teach, like the current course I'm doing is called Krishna and Christ, and comparative courses that look into these two traditions taken together. So I brought this little book, not a most monumental academic book, but it's called, it's too small to read here, but it's called Gitanjali by Rabindranath Tagore. And I have several reasons for choosing this book, 100 and some short poems translated from the Bengali by Tagore, the author. First of all, it's a very famous book. It means like the garland of songs. And Rabindranath Tagore was one of the great Renaissance literary figures of India in the first half of the 20th century. He was an educator, a lecturer, a poet, a philosopher, a theologian, a dramatist, and involved in a certain way in the independence movement. He knew Gandhi, Gandhi knew him. And so he was a well-known figure in the Indian context. And this little book, 100 and some poems, won the Nobel Prize for Literature, I believe, in 1912. It might be 1913. And the first literary prize, Nobel Prize for Literature, won by a non-European. And so it was a very notable book simply for that the barrier was broken and somebody from outside the West became the chosen person for this. And another notable thing about the little book is that William Butler Yeats, the great Irish poet, wrote the introduction to it. And that caught my attention right from the beginning. But the real reason I chose the book is because when I went to Kathmandu in 1973, having graduated from college, I was teaching at a school called St. Xavier's School in Kathmandu Valley. And it was a boarding school. And so every night I had to go to the study hall and supervise the students as they did their study. And I remember one night I decided I wanted to read something, so I ran into the library and grabbed a book off the shelf, Gitanjali. And I went into the classroom and I sat there and I was sort of knocked off my feet or knocked off the chair by reading this book because it spoke to me so directly and so beautifully. It was really the first book of Asia, the first book of Hindu tradition, because Rabindranath Tagore grew up out of a Hindu background, that touched my heart and kind of intellectually stimulated me at the same time. So in terms of my 50 years of learning from Hinduism, it really began in a certain way with this very small book of poetry. And I'd just like to read to you, to give you a feel for it. The first poem, which was the one I read sitting in the study hall that night in Kathmandu around this time, so perhaps October of 1973. It might even be 50 years ago this month. And this is the first poem that I read. Thou hast made me endless, such is thy pleasure. This frail vessel thou emptiest again and again, and fillest it ever with fresh life. This little flute of a reed thou hast carried over hills and dales, and hast breathed through it melodies eternally new. At the immortal touch of thy hands, my little heart loses its limits in joy, and gives birth to utterance ineffable. Thy infinite gifts come to me only on these very small hands of mine. Ages passed and still thou pourest, and still there is room to fill. A simple poem, but I think for me, a newcomer to the Kathmandu Valley, my first time outside the United States, right out of college. Suddenly here was a spiritual, intellectual connection with a poet whose name I only learned when I picked the book off the shelf. I think in some ways this was sort of a predictive book that started me on the right path. So I have a good philosophical, theological training in the Catholic tradition. I've read all the heavy-duty Catholic theologians such as St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, modern figures. They're weighty books of prose. But I think like many a person of faith in many traditions, it's the poetry, it's the music, the song that speaks immediately to the heart. One thinks of the recitation of the Quran, let's say, as a sacred text, or go to a temple or synagogue on Friday night and you hear the Hebrew of the Torah being recited. It speaks to you even if you don't know the language. Or in innumerable Hindu temples that I've gone to, the Sanskrit being chanted, or the Tamil, or the Bengali being sung. So often it speaks before the words catch up and the meanings catch up with what you're hearing. And this could be extended to the visual arts as well, of course, and performance. What I find with this book is that it's not the original. Tagore wrote most of these lyrics in Bengali first, and you can dig out and hear recordings of them in a rather dramatic fashion, some of them being read and sung and danced and so on. And yet somehow it carries over somehow echoes of the original into the English. And I would like to think that, well, we need to go to each tradition on its home ground, so to speak, and find the beauty, the sound, the sense experience there, that we as professors and scholars and people at a university are also great translators. We take the ideas, we take the language, but hopefully we're also communicating the beauty and the spirituality of traditions through the arts, through all that we enjoy when we use our senses to experience culture, religion, and ultimately, I would say, God as well. One other that I picked that I've used any number of times in interfaith gatherings might be an appropriate one to read. The poems are not exactly in any kind of logical order. One can't really see from them why this one or that one follows from the one before. They're sort of like moments and insights of beauty, or Gitanjali, like a garland of songs, one flower next to another flower next to flower. But this one is one that I've used any number of times at interfaith gatherings, including a few months ago I gave lectures in Baltimore at Loyola University and the Center for Islamic Christian Jewish Studies there. And I read this poem at the dinner, the interfaith dinner after the lectures and so on. And I think it's appropriate, and I hope it works for you as you listen to it. Number 63. Thou hast made me known to friends whom I knew not. Thou hast given me seats in homes not my own. Thou hast brought the distant near and made a brother, a sister of the stranger. I am uneasy at heart when I have to leave my accustomed shelter. I forget that there abides the old and the new, and that there also thou abidest. Through birth and death, in this world or others, wherever thou leadest me, it is thou the same, the one companion of my endless life, who ever linkest my heart with bonds of joy to the unfamiliar. When one knows thee, then alien there is none, then no door is shut. O grant me my prayer, that I may never lose the bliss of the touch of the one in the play of the many. I might add, perhaps some people listening might wonder, who is the thou? Who is the poet talking to? And I think it's deliberately vague. Some of the poems seem to be talking about someone he is in love with, some human friend, some companion that he loves. But most of them seem to be talking about God, a God that he chooses not to name in a sectarian fashion. He's not interested in competing religious traditions. He's not interested in closing doors, but saying the I-thou relationship of the poet, the human soul in relationship to the divine person, simply say you and me, I and thou, and leaves it at that. And as you can see in this poem, there is a sense here of the intimacy of his relationship with this thou, the God of his life, which then somehow gives him friends again and again and again in every place he goes. Surely for him in Bengal and India, but also in London, also at the Nobel Prize ceremony. Amazingly, that he keeps discovering the God of his love and life everywhere he is. And this poem captures it so nicely. Over the years, I've learned that there are all kinds of intellectual and academic questions one might raise about this book. It's a translation from the Bengali. How much is it faithful to the original Bengali of Tagore's own poetry? I don't know Bengali. It's not one of my research languages. And scholars have pointed out that it's missing here and there. Certain things have changed when you read it and hear it in Bengali and you hear it in English. Some people have speculated that William Butler Yeats, master of the English language, helped Tagore to polish the poetry and make it sound better in English. All kinds of questions have arisen about it. And I think, though, that over the years, what has struck me is that whatever the intellectual, indological, East-West history of the book, however he cooperated with Yeats in the composition, the translations being polished, and so on, it's a marvelous example of something that works across cultures globally. I think it's one of the most well-known books of Indian poetry. Simply, again, Gitanjali, Garland of Songs. And it struck to me is that all my learning and all my PhD studies and all the books I've written and all the things I've learned over the years, there's a certain kind of symmetry in return that you start with something simple, an intuition that something is beautiful and it touches your heart. And then 20 years later, 30 years later, now 50 years later, you can go back and read it and it still makes a great difference to you. It's not a book that I've written academic articles about, but I think when I introduce Hinduism to different people, students, people in my church and so on like that, I say take Gitanjali, take the beautiful poems of this book and start with them, and you'll begin to open up this new world of Asia, the wisdom of Bengal, and one of the great geniuses of world history, Rabindranath Tagore.